because she was a Lancastrian. When the marriage was revealed, Edward's family were fuming, but Edward refused to give up his new queen, and although Edward would go on to chase all sorts of other women, he always came back to his wife, with whom he had 10 children. So let us go to the next king. Now I don't have a card for Edward V, so let's read a bit more. Edward V lived the 2nd of November 1470 to circa 1483. He reigned for a very short time, between the 9th of April 1483 and the 25th of June 1483. When his father, Edward IV, died, Edward V was supposed to become king. However, when he came to the throne, he was just 12 years old and didn't have any powerful friends or advisors. His own uncle Richard put him and his brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, into the Tower of London, and the tragic little princes in the tower were never seen again. Edward V was one of the little princes in the tower, although perhaps he really should have been called the King in the Tower. Edward was just a 12-year-old boy when his father, Edward IV, died unexpectedly. With nobody to look after the young heir, a powerful struggle for the throne ensued. The most powerful of all was Edward's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Uncle Richard suddenly decided that Edward and his brother, also called Richard, needed to go into the Tower of London for their own safety. Everyone knew what happened to the last king who'd been sent there, Henry VI, who died shortly after his arrival. At this time, rumours started to spread died suddenly, and his young son Edward became king. Richard was named Lord Protector of the realm because 12-year-old Edward was really too young to reign. But then people started whispering that Edward IV and his queen, Elizabeth Woodville, weren't properly married, and that meant Edward V wasn't really a king at all, just an ordinary little boy. It also meant that Richard ought to be king, and he lost no time in taking up the crown. Richard was crowned on the 6th of July, 1483. Anne and Richard only had one child, also called Edward, and the young boy died less than a year after his parents' coronation. Anne followed her son to the grave soon after, leaving Richard all alone. A few months later, Henry Tudor, the new star of the House of Lancaster, returned to England with one aim: to take Richard's throne. At the Battle of Bosworth, the king suffered a huge betrayal when 7,000 men all defected to Henry. Richard fought bravely, battling on even when his horse had run off without him, but eventually he was killed by Henry's men. The Wars of the Roses were finally at an end. The Tudors then made sure that everyone remembered Richard as evil. They deformed his figure in portraits and threw away his body. It wasn't found again until 2012, when it was uncovered in a car park in Leicester. And then we go on to Henry VII. Henry VII lived between the 28th of January 1457 and the 21st of April 1509. He reigned between the 22nd of August 1485 and the 21st of April 1509. As the first Tudor king, Lancastrian, Henry defeated his rival, the Yorkist Richard III, at the Battle of Bosworth, thereby winning the throne. He cemented his new position by marrying Richard's niece, Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, bringing together the houses of York and Lancaster and ending the Wars of the Roses. Having secured his position as king, Henry VII then had to fight off various impostors who made their own claims to the crown, including Lambert Simnel. Henry made him into a kitchen boy, and Perkin Warbeck, who wasn't so lucky and ended up dead. In order to keep himself safe, Henry set up a personal bodyguard called the Yeomen of the Guard, a team which still exists today. You may have seen them accompanying the Queen in their red and gold uniforms. The Tudor king was clever with money and restored peace and prosperity to the land and to the crown, nearly tripling royal income during his reign. He left a treasury full of money when he died in 1509. The Lancastrians, descendants of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and the Yorkists, descendants of John of Gaunt's brother Edmund, 1st Duke of York, squabbled over the throne for decades in a bitter civil war known as the War of the Roses. Henry VII, a great-great-grandson of John of Gaunt, and champion of the Lancastrians, finally put an end to all of the fighting when he invaded England and defeated the then king, Richard III, at the Battle of Bosworth in Leicestershire. Beating Richard III was not enough to secure him the throne. However, Sir Henry wisely married the Yorkist princess Elizabeth, ending the wars. VII's bride was Elizabeth of York, the eldest surviving child of Edward IV. In spite of the marriage having been arranged between the couple's mothers, Henry felt deeply in love with his wife. It was said that upon her death he wouldn't let anybody come near him. However, Henry was a clever fellow, and his grief may have been tempered by panic that his hard-won crown was once again in danger. His eldest son and heir had died, leaving just one young boy to inherit, and with Elizabeth gone, there was the possibility of having another son. With this in mind, he began looking around for a new wife to take Elizabeth's place. In spite of having united the houses of Lancaster and York, Henry VII and the House of Tudor faced lots of threats. In 1487, some of the old Yorkists presented a young boy who they claimed was the Earl of Warwick, Richard III's nephew and the rightful heir to the throne. In fact, this lad was just an ordinary boy named Lambert Simnel. Henry knew this right away because he had the real Earl of Warwick locked up in the Tower of London, was a Protestant and wanted everyone in England to take on his favoured religion. He insisted that symbols of Catholicism, such as stained glass and statues, were removed from churches. Always quite sickly, Edward died when he was just 15 years old. It was during Edward VI's Protestant reign that the Book of Common Prayer was introduced in England in 1549. This was more than just a new book. Its publication meant that some parts of church services would be conducted in English rather than only in Latin. This was hugely controversial and even provoked rebellion in Cornwall and Devon. The Church of England still uses an updated version of the Book of Common Prayer today. Next in line to the throne after Edward was his big sister Mary, a staunch Catholic. Edward was so worried about the country falling back into Catholic hands that he agreed to leave the throne to his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, the daughter-in-law of his main adviser, the Duke of Northumberland. Rumours spread that Northumberland kept the dying king alive just long enough to sign papers confirming this setup, and then, as soon as the signature was secured, quite happily let him die. Okay, and now I don't have a card for Lady Jane Grey. She lived between 1537 and the 12th of February 1554, and she reigned between the 10th of July 1553 and the 19th of July 1553. Famous for being the 9 days queen, poor Jane didn't really stand a chance. She was thrust onto the throne, although never crowned, by her scheming father-in-law, the Duke of Northumberland, as part of her Protestant attempt to prevent Henry VIII's Catholic daughter Mary from taking the throne. Jane's claim to the throne came from the fact that she was the great-granddaughter of Henry VII and the first cousin once removed of Edward VI. When Edward VI was dying in June 1553, he actually nominated Jane as his successor, subverting the claims of his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth. However, members of the Privy Council changed their minds on this decision once the king had died and proclaimed Mary as queen on 19th of July 1553. Jane was convicted of high treason in November that year. Although her life was initially spared, later rebellions against Mary I's plans to marry Philip of Spain led to the execution of both Jane and her husband. Okay, so we're going to leave it there, but next time we will start with Mary I. This has been